The cold came through the floor before the decree did. Archivist Felmoth noticed it first. The pale granite of the circular assembly's lowest platform, kept at 7 degrees to make visiting species uncomfortable, pressing against anything that stood on it. She had watched species stand on that platform for 800 years. She knew what discomfort looked like from up on the record's balcony. Callista Brennan was not uncomfortable. She was still, completely, wrongly still, both hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain cup, steam rising from the black tea inside, her face carrying a small private smile that had no business being in this room. 718 species were applauding the decree that had just ended her civilization's independence, and she was smiling at something only she could see. That was the wrong detail. Felmoth filed it and kept watching. No alarm, no tears, no raised voice. High Chancellor Drovnik Shen of the Zalith Imperium stood at the central seat, 2.9 meters of chitin and authority, 9 sensor stalks sweeping the chamber in slow satisfaction. His throat sac pulsed indigo. His harmonized dual-tone voice had carried the subjugation decree across 61 tiers without effort. Humanity's 147 colony vessels, forfeit, 11 contested sectors, dissolve, the species designated subject pending as of 0800 hours the following morning. The applause was enormous. 718 delegations, all their native forms of approval, grinding, clicking, harmonic, percussive, filling the chamber the way water fills a closed space. Brennan sipped her tea. Shen's sensor stalk stilled. His throat sac pulsed again, brighter than uncertain. Felmoth had watched him conduct 89 subjugations. She knew what he expected to see from this platform. This was not it. Brennan set the cup down. The porcelain met the stone podium with a soft clink. She looked up at Shen, 2.1 meters up from the sunken platform, from the place designed to make her feel small, and she said, barely above a whisper, "You have no idea what's about to happen." 3 of Shen's left side sensor stalks curled inward. A Zalith defensive posture. Felmoth had not seen one displayed publicly in 214 years. She wrote the time in her record. Then she wrote in the small margin she kept for personal notes. She already knew. Stay close. What I'm about to tell you, I have kept records for 1800 years, and I am still not sure I have the right words for it. 11 years before that morning, a T-Sarin clerk named Pashrel was eating cold grain mash at her terminal in the sublevel vault of the Archive of Unspoken Precedents, 14 kilometers below the assembly floor. She had ink on 3 of her 4 hands. She did not look dramatic about what she did next. She had been planning it for 3 months and had decided, sometime in the 2nd month, that she was not going to make it into anything bigger than it was. She was going to eat her mash and send the file and go home. She sent it. The packet landed in a human diplomatic server in Sector 14 and sat unread for 9 hours before a junior analyst named Reese opened it by accident while looking for something else. He read the first 3 pages. Then he read them again. Then he sent a message to his supervisor that said only, "I think someone just gave us the playbook." Felmoth had not known any of this at the time. She had only filed Pashrel's transfer under a routing code that meant administrative error, gone home, and hummed the morning frequency for the first time in 3 centuries. Not because she expected it to end badly, because she thought it might end well, and she didn't know how to sit with that. Standard year 4818, 11 years before the session that would end a 983-year empire. The circular assembly had been built to make resistance feel impossible. Felmoth had attended its opening in year 3982, and she had understood the intent even then. The 61 tiers rising in a curve designed to seat power at the top, the acoustics tuned to carry Zalith harmonics at full strength while cutting human vocal ranges by 30 to 40%, the directional lighting that put the central seat in warm gold and left the low platform in flat gray. 721 species currently lived under Zalith protective governance. 126 held voting rights. Every one of them was a Zalith ally. The law here was not a tool for fairness. Felmoth had known that for 800 years. She had kept the records anyway. It was what the T-Sarin Collective did: archive, observe, and never intervene. She had never made herself visible during an active session. She looked down at the low platform. Brennan had refilled her cup. In Tier 59, Delegate Voss of the HFY sat with his feet not quite reaching the floor, his seat built for a species twice his size. His crystalline bone structure caught the directional light when he moved. His hands were folded and shaking. The HFY had been subjugated 89 years ago, 4 hours start to finish. Population before, 3.7 million. After, 11,200 survivors on a low-gravity moon with no mineral value. Voss had been born on that moon. His mother had been 7 years old when the intake processing began. Felmoth had the Zalith's own intake logs from that day. She had been keeping them in a separate index for 11 years, ever since Paschal had sent a handwritten note tucked into a routing envelope. They're going to ask for these eventually. Don't file them under General Archive. She had not filed them under General Archive. Near the ceiling, media drone operator Surix made a small calibration adjustment to his feed. 6-limbed, Kell species, 31 years covering council sessions. He expected a routine vote. He checked the live connection to 847 outlets and found it stable. He zoomed to a wide establishing shot and waited. Callista Brennan had arrived on Nexus Station 14 months before the session. Her quarters on Deck 94 were 3 by 4 meters with a window-facing void. She had hung her canteen from a hook near the door the first night and taken it down every morning to fill it for 14 months. She had not used the station's recreation spaces. She had used the archive. Felmoth had first seen her properly on the 43rd day, gray suit, frayed cuffs, sitting cross-legged on the archive's secondary reading room floor with 6 stacks of legal volumes arranged in a pattern that took Felmoth weeks to recognize. Tea beside her. Notebook open. She had clearly been there since before opening hours. Felmoth had asked what she was looking for. Brennan had looked up, held her cup with both hands in the way she did when she was thinking, and said, Article 7, Subsection 12, every species it's been applied to. Every species it should have been applied to and wasn't. Subsection 12 required 3 full appeal cycles before any subjugation decree could take effect. It was the most broken clause in the Interstellar Accords. The Zalith had used it as a protection, exactly 0 times in 983 years. That's about 14 kilometers of shelving, Felmoth had said. I know, Brennan had said. I've been here 42 days. She went back to her reading. Felmoth had stood in the doorway a moment. Then she had gone to her own terminal and opened the separate index, the one with Paschal's note tucked into the physical file cover, and added an entry. Human delegate, gray suit, wool socks burgundy, day 43, reading subsection 12. The morning of the session, Brennan was standing in the archive corridor before it opened. Same canteen, same notebook. Better shoes, though she had kept the socks, burgundy wool hand-knit, slightly too thick for what she was wearing. You didn't sleep, Felmoth said. A little. My aunt always said that's the right amount before something important. Brennan turned the canteen in her hands. The frayed cord on the cap caught the light. She spent 2 hours in the secondary reading room going through a document she clearly already knew by heart, lips moving slightly, like she was checking the order of something. At 7:45 she stood, capped the canteen, straightened her jacket. She looked at Felmoth, and for just a moment, something in her face settled. Not calm exactly, the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has finally reached the place where it gets set down. Thank you, she said, for the 14 months. I filed everything under standard access protocols, Felmoth said. True, and not an answer. Brennan smiled. I know you did. Her footsteps were quiet going down the corridor. Felmoth looked at the floor of the secondary reading room, 6 stacks of volumes still arranged in their pattern. She recognized it now. A map of citation chains. 983 years of broken law laid out on the floor like a blueprint. She went to the balcony as the session was called to order. Chancellor Shen moved through the opening ceremonies with the ease of something that had never been required to hurry. 41 years in the central seat, 8 personal subjugations, 19 authorized, 214 conquest marks scored into his chiton. He read the decree. The applause came, and then Brennan pressed her thumb to the podium and the holographic timer appeared. 11 years, 3 months, 8 days. The applause tapered tier by tier, a wave of quiet moving through 718 species as they registered what they were seeing. Shen's sensor stalks went very still. Brennan said, calm as she had ever sounded in 14 months of quiet archive mornings. That's how long we've been ready for this exact decree. The chamber laughed. Felmoth timed it. 63 seconds. It was not meant cruelly, or not entirely. A species of 200 million, 11 years in galactic contact, claiming 11 years of preparation against a 1,000-year empire. It read as the kind of thing a small creature says before it understands the room. During those 63 seconds, Brennan sipped her tea and said nothing. Shen raised one arm. The laughter settled. His harmonized voice carried without effort. Envoy. No mechanism exists for a subject-pending species to contest a decree of this class. You may file a written objection, reviewed within 4 to 7 years. Is there anything further? Brennan set her cup down. That soft clink again. Yes, I'd like to introduce my team. She paused. I'd suggest staying in your seat, Chancellor. The document is already transmitting. Shen's sensor stalks twitched. What document? She didn't answer. From the witness corridor, the narrow hall along the chamber's east side where minor species delegates waited in shadow, 5 humans stepped into the light. Felmoth had seen all of them before, in different corners of Nexus Station over 14 months. She had not connected them. That, she understood now, had been entirely deliberate. Dr. Ilara Venn, 71, white hair half escaped from its braid, fingers coffee-stained to the second knuckle. She carried a tablet dense with text, its edges worn from years of handling. Captain Joran Hallies, former military, currently listed as an unregistered civilian researcher. Right eye clouded gray, the result of intelligence work gone wrong 8 years ago. He held a braille datapad, his thumb moving slowly across it even as he stood still. Tobias Crane, 59, no listed affiliation, maintenance coveralls, cleaning rag folded in one hand. Felmoth recognized him now. He had been the technician she had seen in the ventilation access corridors on sublevels 2 through 7 for over a year. She had thought nothing of it. Grandmother Amara Song, 84, great-grandmother of 22, knitting needles clicking softly on a teal scarf as she walked. Her grandson had died in the Sector 14 incursion, what the Zalith's record called a border enforcement action, and what humanity's records called something else entirely. Commander Livia Mbatha walked to Brennan's left, arms behind her back, watching Chancellor Shen's throat sack the way something watches something it has been tracking for a long time and is finally close enough to. Brennan waited until they were all in place. You're looking at Operation Shepherd's Ledger. The name meant nothing to most of the chamber. On the record's balcony, Felmoth's secondary arms pressed flat across her chest. She knew that name. 11 years ago, Brennan said, a T-Saran clerk named Paschal sent humanity your subjugation protocols. The real ones, intake procedures, legal frameworks, the precedent chains you used to justify each case before and after. She sent them because she had watched you use them 89 times. She had helped file the paperwork on 36 of those cases, and she decided that was enough. Very quiet in the chamber now. You executed her 7 years later. Clerical inefficiency, your record says. Brennan's voice dropped lower, not softer, just smaller, more precise. Her name was Paschal. She had ink on 3 of her 4 hands the morning she sent the file. I want that detail in the record. Shen's harmonized dual tone shifted, a slight flattening that Felmoth recognized as the sound of controlled uncertainty. We read what she sent us, Brennan said. Then we spent 11 years writing a response. Venn pressed a key. The holographic timer disappeared, replaced by a scrolling list. Dense text, header in large type. Documented violations of interstellar accords. ZALLITH Imperium. Standard YEARS 3846, 4829. And below the header, one number. 61,447. The list scrolled. It did not stop. At the current rate, it would take 4 minutes and 12 seconds to reach the end. Shen watched it for a moment. Then he reached behind his seat and adjusted the temperature control panel, a small, almost casual motion. His chitin had gone slightly pale at the edges. "Selective citation is not documentation," he said. Ven looked up. She had the expression of someone who had read every counterargument before walking into the room. Page 7419 addresses that. She turned to it. She had bookmarked it already. Article 7, subsection 12, she said, her voice flat with repetition. 3 full appeal cycles required before any subjugation decree takes effect. The Zalith gave the Hrathi 4 hours. Population before intake, 3.7 million. After, 11,200. We have the intake logs. She looked at Shen. Your intake logs. In Tier 59, Delegate Voss of the Hrathi had gone completely still. His hands had stopped shaking. He was watching Ven's tablet the way someone watches a door they had stopped believing would ever open. Shen said, very controlled. The Hrathi proceedings were conducted under emergency provisions established by page 9601. Ven turned to it. The emergency clause requires independent threat verification. The verification in the Hrathi case was authored by the same office that issued the decree. Same officer, same day, same hour. She looked at him. We have the timestamps. The list was still scrolling. Near the ceiling, Surix had stopped looking bored. 3 of his 6 limbs had moved to the backup feed controls, not as a replacement, just as insurance. He zoomed his primary shot to the scrolling list. 847 outlets were watching that frame. The document Brennan had mentioned, the one already transmitting, was not something yet to come. It was this, live right now. Felmoth saw it before anyone else did. On the upper tiers, Senior Arbiter Vex of the Kalar Alliance had leaned toward his aide and was whispering. His secondary hand, the one he kept folded in his lap during routine sessions, was moving, writing something. The Kalar had been Zalith allies for 341 years. They had voted with the Imperium on every contested measure in Felmoth's living memory. Vex was writing something down, and he was doing it while the violation list was still scrolling. Felmoth did not move, but her secondary arms pressed tighter across her chest. Chancellor Shen requested a procedural recess. Brennan said, still quiet, still holding her cup, "We'd like to keep moving if you don't mind." Shen's sensor stalk spread wide, the Zalith gesture of performed patience, the one that said I am being reasonable in the face of unreason. He had used it 89 times before. Felmoth had records on every instance. These citations, Shen said, cover 983 years of complex governance decisions. Proper review requires. Page 1412, Dr. Vin said, without looking up. That's the section on review timelines. Under Article 91, Institutional Corruption Clause, an active session may proceed without recess when evidence of systematic violation is presented in real time. She turned to the page. It was already bookmarked. We're in an active session. The evidence is being presented in real time. 3 delegates in the upper tiers leaned forward. Shen's harmonized voice stayed level. Article 91 has never been invoked. No, Brennan said, it hasn't. She let that sit for a moment, long enough for the chamber to understand what she was saying without her having to say it. Surix, near the ceiling, had stopped all secondary tasks. Every one of his 6 limbs was now on the primary feed controls. 847 outlets were watching a live session in which a subject-pending species had just told the most powerful chancellor in the known systems that he had no legal basis to pause. Behind Brennan, Tobias Crane stepped forward. He was still holding his cleaning rag. He folded it once, then again, then set it on the edge of the podium, a small, unhurried motion. Something to do with hands that had spent 14 months in ventilation shafts learning to be patient. Sublevels 2 through 7, he said. His voice was the quiet kind that carries well in a room built to diminish it. 14 months of access. The ventilation maintenance contract runs through a Nexus Station subsidiary, which is registered as a neutral service provider under Council Charter. So the recordings I made are legally admissible as environmental monitoring data. He reached into the pocket of his coveralls and produced a small drive. Every meeting held in this building for 14 months, every session, every closed briefing, every conversation in Corridor 7B, which is where your aides discuss things you don't want entered into formal record. The indigo in Shen's throat sac pulsed fast. "We have the ventilation logs," Crane said, "from inside this building." Silence. Not the 63-second kind, a different kind. The kind that comes when a room full of very powerful beings simultaneously does the math and gets the same answer. They had been recorded in their own building, for over a year, by a man in maintenance coveralls who had never once looked important. Grandmother Amara Song kept knitting. The soft click of her needles was the only sound for a full 4 seconds. Voss of the Hrathai stood. He was 9/10 of a meter tall, and his tier seat was built for a species twice his size. But he stood with the kind of stillness that makes a body take up more space than it should. His crystalline hands were no longer shaking. "I have a procedural statement," he said. His voice came through the acoustics at about 60%, the standard reduction applied to minor species vocal ranges. He spoke louder, which was what the platform was designed to make you do. Then he stopped, reset, and spoke at his original volume, slowly and clearly. "The Hrathai were given 4 hours. 3.7 million of us. 4 hours." He turned to face not Shen but the rest of the chamber, the tiers of species who had voted, session after session, to sustain the system that had produced those 4 hours. "We are 11,200 now. My mother was 7 when the intake processing began. I want the chamber to understand that number, not as a data point, as a child who was 7 years old." No one spoke. Voss sat back down. His hands were folded in his lap again, but they were steady now, the way hands go steady when they have finally said the thing they came to say. Felmoth's eyes were fully rust-brown. She had not cried in 6 centuries. She did not cry now, but she hummed, very quietly, the beginning of the morning frequency, and then stopped herself, because this was not, she realized, a morning moment. She was not sure yet what kind of moment it was. From the lower tiers, 14 species rose. Not all at once. In sequence over about 40 seconds, each one standing as the one before them completed the motion, like a current moving through water. Hrathai Vreni T-Saren delegates from the secondary seats, the Kaler contingent's junior members, and 11 others. The Shen, the Marathi, the Pallid, the Weft, the Duskriders, the Echokin, the Lastborn, the Silent Thread, the Unrecorded, and the human delegation, already standing. 14 species. One for every century the Zalith had broken their own law, though Brennan did not say that. She didn't need to. Voss said it quietly into the microphone on his tier's railing, and it carried. Shen's sensor stalks curled inward another degree. Then Felmoth stood up. She had not stood up during an active session in 1800 years. The T-Saren Collective's role was to record, not to witness visibly, to be present without being seen, to maintain the fiction of neutrality that allowed them access to everything. Standing up meant giving that up. It meant the record would show her name attached to this moment, and what that meant for her collective standing, she did not yet know. She stood up anyway. Her voice cracked on Pashrul's name. She had not expected that. "I authorized her data transfer," Felmoth said. Her secondary arms were still across her chest, but she made herself lower them. "I watched her die for it. I spent 7 years helping humanity build this case from the records division of this building, and I filed every document under standard routing codes because I did not know how else to help." She turned to face Shen. "They didn't use human law. They used ours. All 847 species worth of precedent. Against you." Then grandmother Amara Song finished the row she was knitting. She counted the stitches, her lips moved with the count, and when she reached the end, she folded the teal scarf once precisely and set it in her bag. She stood. She walked to the edge of the platform, moving past Mbatha, past Crane, past Vin with her open tablet, until she was at the very front. She reached into her coat and took out a small piece of paper, folded twice, handwritten. She held it up. She said nothing. Every feed in the chamber zoomed in. 847 outlets. 847 shots of a handwritten piece of paper that no one could read from where they were sitting. Shen asked, his voice still controlled, "What is that?" Brennan answered for her. "It's a name," she said. "The first of 8,231. We haven't read the list yet." The chamber understood all at once that the session was not over. Shen's dual tone fractured. One tone dropped out. What remained was a single frequency, thin, uncertain, the Zalith equivalent of a voice going quiet when there is nothing left to say that will help. 3 delegates in the upper tiers stood and walked toward the exit. 4 more followed, then 5, then the rest, 12 in sequence, each departure a small confirmation of the one before it. Commander Mbatha stepped to the podium. She had not spoken since walking in from the witness corridor. She put her arms behind her back and looked at what remained of the Allied bloc, the delegations that had not left, watching Shen for direction he was no longer positioned to give. "We don't need enforcement," she said. "We need the galaxy to watch what happens when you refuse." She pressed a single key on the podium's surface. The holographic display above the chamber changed. Not the violation list. A map, color-coded live feed indicators blinking at 147 points. Human colony vessels. 89 Allied stations. All of them broadcasting. "The feeds are live," Mbatha said. "All 847 of them, right now, have been since we walked in." Surex zoomed his primary camera to Shen's throat sac. The indigo pulse was visible on every screen in council space. Brennan placed the 19-page document on the podium. She did not read all of it. She read the parts that mattered. Page 4. Zalith forces vacate 23 contested sectors within 90 days. She turned a page. Page 9. Reparations to 89 species. 61 billion standard credits, distributed through neutral arbitrators. She turned another. Page 14. Chancellor Shen resigns by 1400 hours today, or we release all 61,447 citations simultaneously to 847 media outlets. She set the document down. She picked up her tea. "You have enforcement," she said. "We have witnesses your move. No weapon drawn, no vote called, no formal motion entered." Shen's resignation notice appeared on the central display at 13:47 hours, 13 minutes before the deadline. The chamber did not react immediately. The notice sat on the display, and the chamber read it, and for 7 seconds, no one moved. Not the kind of silence that follows shock, the kind that follows a machine realizing it has been taken apart by its own parts. Shen's 9 sensor stalks curled inward until their tips touched, a shape the Zalith had not shown publicly in 214 years. His throat sac pulsed, indigo, then violet, then a flat gray that Felmoth had no word for because she had never seen it before. Shen's stalks curled, his voice broke, his throne dissolved. Not in fire, not in debris. In 13 minutes and a piece of paper and a room full of witnesses who would not look away. Felmoth's eyes shifted from rust brown to amber. She had not felt amber in 800 years. She had forgotten the physical sensation of it, a warmth that started somewhere behind her secondary arms and moved outward. Not joy, something older than joy, the feeling of a record being complete. Behind her she heard Ven close her tablet, a clean sound final. She heard Crane fold his cleaning rag for the last time. She heard Amara's song take out her knitting again, the quiet click of needles resuming, unhurried, as though this had always been the plan and the plan had always worked. Mbatha said nothing. She watched Shen's gray throat sac and nodded once to herself. Brennan set her teacup down on the podium. The porcelain met the stone with a soft clink that 847 feeds amplified across every council station in the known systems. She said, barely above a whisper, the same words she had said at the very beginning of the session. "You needed us to be weak. We spent 11 years making sure the whole galaxy was watching when we weren't." 3 tiers up, Senior Arbiter Vex of the Kaler stood. He did not address Shen. He addressed the remaining chamber. "The Imperium's legal standing is suspended pending external audit. All subjugation decrees issued in the past 983 years are under review." He paused. "This session is adjourned." He walked toward the upper exit. 23 delegates followed. In the record's balcony, Surex filed his footage. Then, out of habit, he ran a search of his archive, 31 years of coverage. He was looking for the last time a species had filed under Article 91. He found nothing. He searched again, widening the parameters. Still nothing. He saved the search and flagged it. First invocation in recorded session history. Confirm with archive. He did not know, sitting there near the ceiling with his 6 limbs going still, whether that flag would matter, whether anyone would follow up, whether Article 91 had just opened a door or simply closed one. He would wonder about it for a long time. 3 days after the session, the circular assembly was empty. Felmoth found Brennan there in the morning, sitting on the low platform, 2.1 meters below where the main floor would have been if the builders had been honest. They were already dismantling the elevation difference. Workers had been at it since the day after the session, and the sound of the work carried faintly from the adjoining corridor, a slow, rhythmic scraping of stone on stone. Brennan was holding the folded paper, the one with 8,231 names. Felmoth sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. "How do you carry that?" Felmoth asked. Not a philosophical question, a practical one. Brennan turned the aluminum canteen in her hands, empty now, its tally marks catching the low morning light, each one a scratch in brushed metal, each scratch a person who had been alive. The frayed cord on the cap moved slightly when she shifted her grip. "We don't fight to win," she said. "We fight so the names outlast the empire. That's what human patience is. Not mercy." She ran her thumb across the marks, refusal to let them be forgotten. She began to read the names. Not loudly, just enough for Felmoth to hear. Slowly, one by one, the way you say something when you need it to stay said. Pastoral was first. Brennan's voice did not break. Felmoth's did. When Brennan finally stood, she left the canteen on the podium. Empty, the frayed cord still attached to the cap. The 8,231 marks catching the light from the observation panels above, the same panels that had been angled 847 years ago, to put this platform in shadow. The shadow was gone now. The workers had adjusted the panels the previous afternoon, along with the elevation. Felmoth retrieved the canteen 3 days later. She carried it down 14 kilometers of archive corridors to the Hall of Objects that changed law and placed it on shelf 91, between the Zalith Imperium's founding charter and the index of species they had tried to erase. 6 months after the session, the archive opened a new wing. 14 species contributed material. Workers fitted shelves into walls that had held nothing but silence. The sound of it, hammers, scaffolding, the quiet back and forth of people building something meant to last, carried through the sub-level corridors and up into the reading rooms above. The Zalith's founding charter was moved to a lower shelf. The canteen stayed where Felmoth had put it, on shelf 91, its cord hanging loose, its surface marked with 8,231 small lines, each one the same size, each one cut with the same careful hand, none of them faded.